Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well and enjoying this nice weather finally that we're having. I want to talk about chapters 20 and 21 this week. And so the first chapter talks about several things, of course, but I'm just going to highlight a few. And basically, one thing I want to talk about is the Council of Trent. The Council of Trent was a council that was called to address the concerns of all the reformers and all the reform movements. And so at the Council of Trent, they really tried to look at some of what the reformers were saying. I think when the council was called, and it was called by Pope Paul III, that when it was called, it was an invitation to all the leaders of these other reform movements, but none of them chose to come. So instead, it was a Catholic council, and there they kind of looked at what the reformers were saying, and by and far what they decided was that the Catholic Church was right and that the reformers were wrong. So mostly they kind of re-solidified a lot of things. They made a distinction between justification and salvation because the reformers were using the word justification, talking about how God knows that we're His faithful. They also reaffirmed that tradition holds the same weight as Scripture, that there are 7 sacraments, that Latin is the language of the Bible. So from that point on, it was the language Latin until Vatican II. They formalized the shape of the liturgy, the order of events in the Mass, and they did speak against and kind of outlawed the selling of indulgences, and they also felt the need for priests to have better formal training, so they set up seminaries. Another thing you'll read about are some of the groups some of the different orders that developed after this Reformation movement. And one of those orders is the Jesuits, or also known as the Society of Jesus. Their founder was St. Ignatius of Loyola. St. Ignatius was a soldier in Spain, and he was in a battle, and he was injured in battle, and he was injured pretty badly, so he was kind of laid up in a hospital for a year. And to fill time, he started to read the Bible, and he read the lives of the saints, and he realized that his loyalties had been misplaced and that God was the perfect king and Jesus was the perfect king. And so he started to devote his life to following Jesus. And so one thing that he really stressed was the importance of spirituality, and that we really need to look inside ourselves and be in tune with the moments of what he called desolation and consolation. Consolation are kind of like those high moments, or those moments where you feel really blessed, and moments of desolation are kind of the low moments. And so he asked his friends to join him, and together they formed the Society of Jesus, and they did spend a good deal of time focusing on their spirituality. But the other things that they were really focused on is education and also missionary work. You'll read about a couple other orders like the Capuchins and the Displaced Carmelites. Also, you're going to read about a couple of mystics, St. Teresa of Avila, St. John of the Cross. And the mystics were people who had these really like mysterious sort of unexplainable experiences, encounter with the divine. Sometimes they were almost in like a coma, or they called these moments ecstasies, but they're very mystical. And then they would write down all these really just incredible experiences with Jesus. Chapter 21 goes into a lot about how the church spread, and it basically spread because there was a lot of missionary work that was going on. A lot of times countries would commission people to go discover and find new land that they could conquer and make their own. And that was all political, but the missionaries would follow them, and when they got there after the explorers, they would try to establish Christianity as the religion. And honestly, some of the ways they went about doing this were not great. Sometimes they really forced the religion on people, and sometimes people were killed and tortured if they didn't obey. And sometimes they did go about it the right way, where they really tried to understand the culture and the people and tried to help them see that Jesus is the Christ. So you'll read about Marco Polo in the Orient. You'll read about Henry the Navigator in Morocco, Diego Chao in the Congo. And of course, Portugal and Spain together combined sponsored a lot of the missionary work. And so that includes Christopher Columbus leading, a group of people to, discover America, although we do believe that there were a few people that discovered it first. There was a lot of political fighting, and the Pope got involved with that, which is good and bad. I mean, we want people to know about Jesus Christ and to spread the good news, but sometimes, again, the way they did that wasn't so great. There was a system that was set up in Spanish territories called encomienda, and this was a doctrine system. And basically, the church and state kind of worked together here to try to help the native people and help them with their lands and with kind of making sure that they were treated properly. But the greatest boost to Catholicism that you'll read about deals with Juan Diego. And Juan Diego was a man living in Mexico, and he had an encounter with the Virgin Mary. And so basically he had just been converted to Catholicism. He's walking down the road and Mary appears to him. And he saw her several times. One time, though, he was supposed to meet her and he couldn't go or he was in a hurry. He was trying to bypass that so he could get home to his sick uncle. And then Mary appeared to him and told him that his uncle was fine. And prior to that, his uncle was on his deathbed. And then when he got home, he was 100% cured. And so in one of the apparitions with Mary, she told him to go to the bishop and say that she wanted a church built in the spot where she kept appearing. And Juan Diego said, well, how will the bishop know that I'm telling the truth? How can he believe me? So she had him pick all these roses and put them inside of his cloak, or what they call his tilma. And the roses were significant because it was wintertime, and so roses would not normally bloom at that time. So he gathered them up in his tilma. He went to the bishop, and when he got there, he opened his tilma, and all the roses fell. And imprinted on his tilma on the inside was the picture of Our Lady of Guadalupe that I'm sure you've all seen before. And that was imprinted there in an inexplainable way. And so the bishop believed him, and then when everyone heard this story, they believed him too. So even today, Mexico is one of the most devout countries, and where this tilma is on display, people will stop 100 feet before the church and crawl into that church out of respect for that church and that apparition. The Congregation for the Propagation of Faith was established by Pope Clement VIII, and this was established to help prepare missionaries, to train them, and to help them so that when they got to the countries, it could be a better experience. And today, basically, when a missionary gets there, they try to acclimate to the new culture. They try to assimilate to some degree. And if they're spreading Christianity, they try to, allow the native people of the country that they're in to incorporate some of their cultural traditions in with the faith. And they're looking for natural leaders to kind of take the lead and then eventually leave them in the hands of those people that are native-born people. So yeah, you'll read more about some missionary work. This week you'll do a discussion. I'm working on reading the research papers. I'm enjoying reading them. I will hopefully be done by the middle of the week. I have about half of them done right now. So thanks for your patience with that, working through them, and I will talk to you again next week.